The views expressed in this podcast belong solely to the NCS Graduate Volunteer Podcast team and or the guests featured in the podcast. Therefore, these views do not represent Learn by Design as a company nor its employees.
Hello everyone, welcome to GradCast. My name is Cordis Marie and I am your lead host.
Hi everyone, I'm just Karen.
Hi everyone, I'm Simran.
And hello, I'm Kaya.
So let's start from the beginning then. What do you think about the BLM marches and the activists' opinions on BLM?
I think it's a really important movement and I'm really glad something like this has happened because I think it's something that's been really long awaited. Even though the trigger for this year was George Floyd and his death, because of these marches a lot more has resurfaced. I think it's really important that events like this and movements like this keep taking place so that we get to know more about the matter.
Back in 2013, there was a shooting of another teenager, Trayvon Martin. And even before that, there have been numerous counts of police brutality, especially in America. Race is such a sensitive topic for many people, and many people feel uncomfortable talking about it. But unless white people especially recognize the privilege that they have and they use it to help others, I don't think that we'll be able to cause change without that.
Some white people from working class can say, oh, I don't have white privilege because of my background and how hard it was growing up. But that's not where white privilege comes from. It comes from your skin, and I think that's what we need to get out.
Do you know anything about police brutality and kind of protests about that? Anything about ACAB?
I was reading an article the other day on the New York Times, and they had pulled up some statistics from a study done back in 2012, and it showed that there were 0.5 white people shot for every million of the population, whereas there were 3.3 black people shot dead by the police for every million. And that figure has only increased almost exponentially, this many years later.
The fact that we can see it within us in present day just shows how important it is, because we know that black people are 5 times more likely to be stopped and searched and 5 times more likely to be a victim of police brutality, which shows how much of a problem it is. There's a higher presence of police in black neighborhoods, and this needs to be questioned.
I think we should always look back into history, because history shows us what we don't need to repeat. There needs to be the education and the teaching on how this is just not right. In places like schools, it can be that in the playground a child is being picked on because of their colour, and unfortunately I have experienced that. No child is born racist. The things that the parents have been teaching their kids, it just feels as though there won't be a change unless the older generations start realizing that people of colour are just as important and have the same rights as them.
I wouldn't say I've first-hand experienced racism, luckily, but I've definitely seen it around me. And as Kaya was saying, I think school is a really good example of how racism and maybe discrimination can maybe stem from. I definitely think that a lot needs to be done in terms of black history, because black British history is still British history, and I think out of all the compulsory topics that we learn in history, a lot of them are not related to black people at all and don't address how brutal colonialization and imperialism was, for example. As well as in history, I think also in English literature as well. I could literally count on my hands how many texts I've learned that were by black writers in comparison to white ones, and I think it's really easy to adapt the curriculum and make sure that we're all being educated so that inequality can be learned more about and we can all learn about it as people.
I think when people think about colonialism, they have this idea of slaves being brought over hundreds of years ago. But the reality is that colonialism, impacts us just as much today as it did back then. Because as you mentioned, as first generation immigrants, as children of immigrants, our lives have been shaped in the context of sacrifice, and just as our ancestors experienced all those sacrifices that they had to make to gain their independence, to care for their families, in a similar way, our parents have had to sacrifice their homelands and the places they called home in order to find a, you know, quote unquote better place for us, because it is reality, like you say, you know, the first world countries do benefit off the back of those that they have colonized. And so as children of immigrants, and as, you know, as a first generation immigrant, I completely recognize how differently our lives could have been if perhaps colonialism didn't take place. And, you know, it hurts me to imagine how those countries could have thrived if that didn't happen to them.
It's that kind of subliminal racism that is what we call institutional racism, where it's like pushed under a rug. We don't want to talk about it. We want to forget about our past. We want to move forward with these social disparities in place still and still at work, and we don't want to acknowledge any of these.
Coronavirus is showing the injustice that the BAME community is experiencing. The BAME community is disproportionately affected by coronavirus. The BAME community almost makes up a third of the NHS, and they're not being rewarded for their work.
How has everyone been, you know, over these past few months?
The handling of the coronavirus, maybe a bit of topic, but it just has not been great. That's in my opinion.
The coronavirus did obviously make a big impact to both my studies and just like my life at home. You know, adjusting to online school has been a challenge, I guess. I think on a like bigger scale, I think it definitely like revealed a lot of how society works in a way. I was quite outraged at the fact that we were clapping every week for nurses on a Thursday, but when it came to raising their wages, everyone seemed to go quiet, you know? I think that's something that I was quite shocked about, especially after hearing recently that MPs are demanding a pay rise even after the people like who are working harder throughout the pandemic, in my opinion, they haven't got a pay rise. I think that's something that I was quite struck by.
And I suppose I've just taken a bit of the time that we had off to kind of further educate myself, because, you know, with everything that was going on, and especially when the marches started and the protests started, you realize that you don't understand as much as you think you do about the history, actually, of what is causing these protests. I would definitely recommend the book, The Good Immigrant. It's a series of essays, and, you know, I've gone through it and I've highlighted my favorite ones. And it just provides kind of a series of insights into what it means to be a minority and what it means to be an immigrant, really, because those are defining features of our lives now.
I've actually read that book. It's so good. There are so many other books out there as well, like Why I Don't Talk to White People About Race Anymore. That's a really, really good book. It's really, really popular, and ever since the BLM protest, you know, boomed, these books about race and inequality have really, really, you know, started selling. Jazz, do you want to explain what cultural appropriation is?
So cultural appropriation is when you misuse, you know, someone else's culture, the items in someone else's culture that are held valuable and that are rewarded, really, for people in those cultures. And it's quite degrading because, you know, the history of someone's culture is very personal to them. And when you see people misusing it, as we have seen numerous times in the media, you know, especially with a lot of influencers that try to sensationalize items, especially in the Black community, that have previously been condemned, like hair. Cornrows are used by influencers to become, you know, are popularized, whereas in workplaces they're condemned and they're seen as unprofessional. And there is a huge difference between cultural appropriation and appreciation.
As a Black person, I know that I've been condemned for my cornrows in schools before, so, you know, just seeing that being completely, you know, accepted and renamed almost, it's really affected me and it's really upset me, and I'm sure it's upset so many other people. And we need to understand that cultural appropriation doesn't just happen in the Black community. It happens everywhere, across all races, and it can happen to anyone. Cultural appreciation, of course, this is, you know, defined differently by different people. For me, at least, it's, you know, engaging with that community, you know, it's really appreciating that culture. Beyonce did that very, very well in her recent documentary and her, I think, musical videos. She really engaged with these cultures and these African cultures. She engaged with that side of herself, and she didn't just use the money for herself and take all the money and kind of run away with it. She gave back to these communities, and she's continuously helping these communities, and I think that that's an amazing example of what we should be doing in society. I just want to touch on colorism in different communities and in media, because I know that in the Asian and Black community, lighter skin tones are preferable to darker skin tones.
I think colorism is such a big problem even to this day, and obviously it stems back to all these Eurocentric standards that can be seen just through colonialization, as we've said. I saw it recently in the media actually, where there's this brand called Fair and Lovely, which is obviously a very problematic name, because just from the name itself, it's suggesting people should, be bleaching their skin and all these other problematic methods that exist unfortunately, in South Asian societies, predominantly, and in Black cultures too. And they decided to change their name to Glow and Lovely, which is not much better. I was equally outraged. I think just things like that show how prevalent colorism and discrimination still is, because I have seen it when I have gone to other countries, when I've gone to India actually. I was constantly seeing how people would always be encouraging people to use these face masks, it'll make your skin glow, it'll make you fairer, and all these things are so problematic, because it sort of implicitly encourages you to want to look more Eurocentric rather than embracing who you are. On top of that, I definitely think the media perpetuates this and makes it even worse. There is definitely a lack of diversity, especially in films and in the media in general. I think it was recently Rihanna's Fenty Beauty. They had their fashion show, and that definitely, I think, portrayed diversity a lot better than other brands. So I think more companies should definitely be taking that sort of stance and making sure that there is more diversity, so that all cultures can feel more welcomed, rather than having to feel like they need to bleach their skin or any other outrageous methods to not be themselves.
There's a problem with colorism within the Black community. So with Rosa Parks, she was not the first Black woman to sit in the wrong place on the bus. It was in fact this 15-year-old girl called Claudette Colvin. And the problem with that was she was too dark and she wouldn't be widely accepted with Black and white people. So because Rosa Parks was lighter.
I'm sure you've seen movies where it's come from books that portray dark skinned characters and then end up being light skinned characters in the actual movie. There is a very, very small group in our community that is being belittled and being shamed for simply the gradient of our skin, and I think that is an issue, as you said, that we need to tackle within ourselves to really portray the message that all Black lives matter. Thank you guys for speaking with me today, and thank you guys for listening to GradCast. It's been GradCast.
Thank you so much for listening today, everyone. If you liked our content today and liked our conversation, please like, share, and subscribe. We'll definitely be posting more, and we'll be very active on all our social media sites. If you'd like us to discuss any other topics that you find interesting, or see us discuss any more current issues, please comment below, and we'll definitely consider them. There are a lot of other prevalent topics that are going on right now that deserve our attention and deserve young people talking about them. So we would love to hear your opinions on them.